Now we have the third session, which is going to be a panel discussion. And in the panel, we have eminent doctors with us. We have Dr. B.K. Shastri. Sir, can you please on your video, please? Yeah, we have Dr. B.K. Shastri, who is the Chief of Pulmonary Hypertension Service at Care Hospitals, Banjara in Hyderabad. We have Dr. T. Sundar, who is the head of transplant services, and he's a cardiothoracic surgeon and head of lung transplant service at Apollo Hospital, Chennai. We have Dr. Vikas Kohli, whom we have heard before. He is an eminent pediatric cardiologist and the founder of Children Heart Foundation. And we have Dr. Abraham Babu, whom also we have heard before in the for exercise testing. Dr. Abraham, can you please come on? Yes. And we have Dr. Shine Kumar, who is my co-moderator. Good evening, everybody. My first question is to you, sir, Dr. Shastri. Can you just brief us about about the epidemiology of pulmonary arterial hypertension? What is the load of the disease in the country of India, and how the prognosis of this patients has changed before and after medications have started being available in India?
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. It's a wonderful meeting. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
Thank you so much. First of all, I should congratulate you. You have organized a very wonderful meeting. This is very useful. Now, coming to your question, epidemiology of the pulmonary hypertension, few things you should know. When you say epidemiology, before I answer that epidemiology, there are a lot of lay people are here, not non-medical people. They should understand pulmonary hypertension is not one disease. It is like saying somebody has jaundice, somebody has fever. You know, when you say fever, it can be anything. It can be pneumonia, malaria, tuberculosis, cancer, whatever. Similarly, pulmonary hypertension is not one disease. Probably most of the audience who are participating here in this meeting will belong to what we call Group 1 pulmonary hypertension. Whereas if you see in the community, in medical practice, the pulmonary hypertension can be because of what we call left heart disease, or due to lung disease, or chronic blood clots in the lungs, or as one of the speakers was having sarcoidosis, many things like that. So in general, if you see, by and large, the most common cause for pulmonary hypertension is what we call left heart disease. Typically, it is seen in the elderly people or any group, for example, for that matter, but typically in the elderly people and following a heart attack, or following elderly women who have long-standing hypertension, which is not treated well, what we call heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or people with chronic lung diseases, that is what we call Group 3, with people who have suffered from the tuberculosis in the past, or chronic bronchitis or emphysema, or nowadays we are seeing a lot of obstructive sleep apnea, obesity, hypoventilation syndromes, and people who have got in Indian context, people who are exposed to domestic firewood, so on and so forth. Coming to the Group 1 pulmonary hypertension, which we are discussing most of it today, that's called pulmonary arterial hypertension. The estimates, we don't have exact estimates in this country, but my guess is what it is in the Western literature, about 7 to 10 per million. We are talking about the Group 1 idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. We are not talking, this does not include other Group 1 pulmonary hypertension disorders, what Vikas Kohli sees often, the congenital heart disease. Untreated, inappropriately treated, inadequately treated congenital heart disease, where there is a hole in the heart, that what we call Eisenmenger, you know, that is another important group in our setup. The other groups are also seen, not uncommonly, the group due to chronic connective tissue disorders are rarely following liver disease, chronic liver disease, but they are uncommon down on the card. We had a lot of prevalence of HIV in this country. Among HIV patients, 0.5% will develop pulmonary hypertension. So all in all, we should know that pulmonary hypertension is not one disease. It may be seen in many diseases. The Group 1 pulmonary hypertension is fortunately rare. 10 per million is considered less. To give an example, I am considered, people think that I see a lot of pulmonary hypertension. I do see a lot of pulmonary hypertension. Even in my clinic, in my per week, I may be seeing about 10 patients or maybe 10 to 15 patients. In general, that is considered a very big number for a general cardiologist to see 10 to 15 pulmonary hypertensions per week. Generally, a cardiologist may see one case for 6 months or one in year, a new case. Now, that is something, some approximation or of about the epidemiology. Coming to what happened over years, I completed my cardiology training in 1990. Very beginning, I was interested in pulmonary hypertension, but nothing could be done. Somewhere in 97, I started a registry of pulmonary hypertension patients. From 97, late 97 to 99, I had collected about 31 patients in my hospital. Among the 31 patients, there is nothing much could be done. Somewhere in 96, I went to US and observed Stuart Rich doing the acute vasodilator challenge, and I wanted to come and do it. It is very cumbersome in those days, especially we didn't have nitric oxide. And epoprostenol, that is the only treatment at that time. It used to cost 20 lakhs in 90 per year in 1996. So, but we were just maintaining registry and trying to do acute vasodilator challenge. And of the 31 patients I collected in 97, 19 patients died within 2 years. The mortality is more than 50% in 2 years. Now, 2000 or 2001, we started using sildenafil. The 50% survival rate improved to 5 years. Then somewhere I think in 2007 or 2008, the bosentan has come, and later on ambrisentan. Now we have got macitentan. The survival has improved significantly. Now average survival, median survival is almost more than 8 to 10 years. Many of my patients whom I started seeing after 2000, those who are continuously taking medicines and without default and maintaining a good lifestyle, many of them have survived. Of course, still there is higher mortality. And for those patients where there is a problem, where the patient deteriorate on combination of sildenafil or tadalafil, we group them as one. And the other three, bosentan, macitentan, and ambrisentan, we group them as one, endothelin receptor antagonist. With a combination of PDE5 inhibitors and endothelin receptor antagonists, a good number of patients do well, but some of them do deteriorate. We know that. And the options, medical options, like one of the speakers was saying, treprostinil, selexipag, epoprostenol, they're all wonderful drugs, we all know. But many of our patients find it difficult to procure them and sustain on those treatments for a very long time. Then we have got the options. We are going to discuss the pot shunt, balloon-atrial septostomy, and lung transplantation. Probably we'll be discussing. This is my experience, what happened to the natural history over past 2 decades.
Okay. Thank you, sir. You summed it up very well. My next question is to Dr. Vikas Kohli. Sir, with your experience with the NGO and dealing with the government also, could you tell us, there is a lot of question about disability certification in patients with pulmonary hypertension. Also, is there any guidelines regarding insurance cover of these patients, and whether we would be able to help them with income tax cover for income tax rebates, I mean.
So disability certification, some of the patients are able to get, especially adults. They have to undergo a special panel and they are able to get disability certification done. Second point was related to dealing with the government. It is a very big challenge to deal with government offices and government issues. Third question was, just remind me again, what was the third one? There were too many of them. Sorry.
Insurance covers.
Insurance. So no, insurance doesn't cover, and that's where our advocacy is coming in. That this is not congenital and they should be covering it. So we are really asking our legal cell to draft, and we have actually international lawyers and international law agencies which are going to fight this and challenge this, especially in urban areas, that insurance has to cover for heart disease in children and heart disease related to pulmonary hypertension related issues also included in that.
Right. Uh, there's another question which is sent to me by the patients. They're asking whether how can they help in expediting this, especially the disability certification.
So the disability certification is done by an appropriate government hospital and an appropriate government committee. You have to locate in your geographical area where and who that government agency, hospital, and committee is, and you have to send the paperwork. They will send back all the paperwork saying they need a fresh set of papers. You will have to send them. Then they will refer to their own cardiology team, and that cardiology team will certify. Then they will give the certification. It takes quite a bit of time as of now,
Okay.
but it
Thank.
is doable. It is doable.
Okay. Thank you, sir. My next, yes, sir. Yes, Dr. Shastri wants to say something.
Come in. Just it occurred to me, since you have got good enthusiastic volunteers, organizations, advocacy groups. See, there are different economic strata in the country. There are definitely low middle class people who find it difficult. The medication, even in the worst case, cost about 5 to 6,000 per month. So, if they can influence and bring it under Ayushman Bharat, you give a yearly lump sum of 60, 70,000 or whatever to the concerned hospital. Then what happens? The other government agencies like in Andhra, we have got Arogyasri, and Tamil Nadu, there must be something else. Karnataka, there is something else. So they can follow the suit. So probably the better thing to some, at least a good number of poorer segments of the society, is if they can bring it in the Ayushman Bharat.
Okay. That's a very good
suggestion. That's a very
yeah.
good suggestion.
Right.
And that's doable.
So my next question is to Dr. Sundar. Sir, patients want to know about the availability, success rate, and the current status of lung transplant in India.
Lung transplant in India now has come of age. The outcomes, the success rate of lung transplant depends on the disease for which the lung transplant was done. So if you look at it that way, you classify them into 4 groups of lung diseases. One is the COPD, which is caused due to destroyed lungs commonly by smoking. ILD is where there are a lot of scars in the lung. Third is cystic fibrosis, which affects children and bronchiectasis in India, where there's a lot of infection and the bugs destroy the lung because there are a lot of big spaces and the airways are dilated. And then you've got pulmonary artery hypertension. And in idiopathic pulmonary artery hypertension is where they can also come to a point where they need lung transplant. And if you look at the survival, the best is among cystic fibrosis, followed by idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Next would be COPD, and last is ILD. And if you were to give a median survival, it is what you call based on conditional survival. Say after the transplant, if the patient survives 1 year, then in PAH, the median survival is over 10 years. But in the first year survival itself, you're looking at a good survival of around 75 to 80%. The same does not hold good for ILD or others. So in this subset of patients having end-stage lung disease, I would say having pulmonary hypertension is slightly better than having ILD or the rest.
Could you tell the audience a little bit about what is the approximate cost they are looking at one time and during the surgery, and the recurring cost of the?
Yes, the operation of choice for pulmonary artery hypertension lung transplant is a bilateral lung transplant. There are times when we have to do a heart and double lung transplant. As of now in Tamil Nadu, the cost comes around about 35 lakhs. And when you do a lung transplant, the first 6 months, in addition to the anti-rejection pills, you need to take pills which will prevent infection. In that, the biggest expense comes from voriconazole, which is an antifungal drug. So having voriconazole as your requirement every month, the expense is around 85,000 to 90,000 a month for the first 6 months. Once voriconazole has been stopped, your anti-rejection is pretty much the same as in a liver transplant or a kidney transplant, which comes to about 8 to 10,000 per month. Having said that, in Tamil Nadu, there are schemes, government schemes, which help with, funding it. They provide about 25 lakhs for a lung transplant.
Thank you, sir. My next question. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Shastri.
We should take advantage of Dr. Sundar. Maybe Sundar, can you tell probably about the timing of lung transplant in idiopathic pulmonary hypertension?
Yes. Well, the entire history of idiopathic pulmonary hypertension has completely changed, as you rightly said, sir, with the introduction of, phosphodiesterase inhibitors and endothelin antagonists. Now, they have totally changed the landscape of pulmonary hypertension, and people are surviving longer. So we don't go and do the transplant unless the patient has symptoms. Now, we have these scoring systems like the REVEAL score or the ESC or ERS scores. And by scoring them, when the REVEAL score is greater than 10, you think about a transplant. Or in the ERS or ECS, if they come into an intermediate or a high-risk category. In fact, a lot of our pulmonary artery hypertension, when they come and see us, we keep them on medical follow-up, and it's about 2-3 years later, we only list them. There are a lot of patients refer. And in that, one clinical feature I would say is patients normally come with class 3, class 4 NYHA. We give them both the dual therapy, vasodilator therapy. You can give them diuretics, digoxin, warfarin, have them well controlled. But when they start getting giddiness, now that is what, some people call it the NYHA class 5. You need to get worried about it. So the timing would be when, if the patient's symptoms are well controlled, everything else seems okay. We just wait and see. With the advent of right heart failure, and as a result of right heart failure, if you develop cardiorenal or cardiohepatic symptoms, we need to have another look and see how things are.
Thank you, Dr. Sundar, for the explanation. I think we are running short. I'll ask one short question to Dr. Shine. And the question is again from the patients is what about pregnancy with pulmonary hypertension? Is it advocated? And if yes, then what is the possibilities of going ahead?
Okay, Prashant, thank you for the question. So as we all know, if you see the guidelines, and the pregnancy is actually written as a contraindication, but there are a lot of supporting literature in the recent years that with the advancement of the treatment, as Shastri sir has told in his talk, with the improvement in survival, so has the outcomes of the pregnant woman has become better. It's not that every pregnancy need to be aborted. The candidate selection for a successful pregnancy depends definitely on the type of the disease the patient has, the overall functional status, and the function of the heart. So it's not that it's an absolute contraindication, but the patient selection has to be appropriate. There has to be a pulmonary hypertension expert. It's a teamwork of the gynecologist, the cardiologist, the intensive care, which have definitely improved there.
Thank you, Dr. Shine. And it's important that all these complex procedures are done at a center where PH specialists are available to take care of the patient.